Hello and welcome to the Extremis Publishing Podcast Christmas Special. I'm Tom Christie and I'm delighted to be joined today by one of our favourite guests, author Robert Murray, who's joining us today to discuss, amongst many other things, the nostalgia of a Tayside Christmas. So thank you, Robbie, for being with us today.
It's a pleasure, Tom. And here we are, talking about Christmas. That's a marvellous topic.
It certainly is, Robbie, and I don't think it could be any more seasonal than discussing the festivities over the decades in glorious Tayside, which is a place really of amazing contrasts and, remarkable scenery and fantastic people. So I would love to talk to you today a little bit about your childhood growing up in Carnoustie. And then we'll move on to the various other Christmases that you've enjoyed in the area in the years since. So without further ado, let's go back to your childhood and the magic of Christmas in Carnoustie, which is the fourth largest place in Angus and a fantastic place to grow up.
Carnoustie is a gem of a place, Tom, there's no doubt about it. And at my ripe old age, thinking about my childhood days, it's a little bit further back down the track. But yes, I hold dear memories of growing up in Carnoustie as a boy. We had some wonderful times. It was a different world, I have to say. Whether it was the school world, the home world, and as I grew up, my journeying into the working world, every aspect of my life, I hold dear memories of each of these chapters in my life. I think the home world, particularly, there was a fever pitch building up. We made our own Christmas decorations, for example. So we sat round the table and the kitchen table, and we all had our favourite Christmas decorations to make. Of course, somewhere along the line we must have bought one of these folding bells, or the unfolding bells, which was the centrepiece in the living room. But of course we then made our chains, our sticky adhesive chains draped all around the room. I think, looking back, the rooms must have been packed full of decorations hanging from every corner, every part of the room, and there was a warmth. I think Mum and Dad probably made extra efforts, perhaps more coal or more logs on the fire. It was warm, it was comfortable, and we busied ourselves writing our letters in the best possible handwriting to go to Santa Claus and push them up the chimney without causing any damage or soot falling down on ourselves. So these were happy days, cosy, comfortable, pre-Christmas excitement, I think. And of course, the big moment came on Christmas morning, and as we awoke, I remember looking early. Of course, I don't know how well or how unwell we slept with the excitement, but I remember trying to look through the greyness of the morning to see if the stocking was filled, had it been filled, and was there anything else near the stocking that might be a surprise gift. Sure enough, all these things came to pass. The long stocking, probably a school stocking, with an elastic band pinned onto the end of the bed, and of course the unmistakable shape of the sock. There had to be an apple, there had to be an orange, there had to be a piece of chocolate, and probably always something slightly unexpected. And then of course the shape of what was there. Was there a box, a big box? What shape was the box? I remember some striking gifts. I got a John Bull printing outfit. I don't know if I'd wanted it or I'd ever made some request I wanted such a thing, but of course for the days and weeks to come, I was sitting down setting my own type, little rubber letters on a wooden board and making them into a typeset piece. Wonderful! I could actually stamp my name and address on a letter. If I was dreaming of sending a letter somewhere, I suddenly could stamp my name and address on something. Golf clubs is a favourite story, and that related to my one and only Christmas gift with golf clubs. I think I got a driver, I got a mashy niblick. We had different names in those days. Gone with it, we didn't have number 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 irons. We had mashy niblicks, and brassies, and we had, of course, a putter. But so much was my excitement that I couldn't wait to put on my pullover and run down to the foot of Admiral Street at Carnoustie, and there in front of me was the baluster, the grassy area right beside the seaside, and I couldn't wait to tee up a ball and whack a ball. Of course, silly me, I remember in my excitement, I whacked off a ball into the white snow grass and immediately lost one ball, and realised that probably Santa Claus wouldn't have, in my silly childhood, I realised enough to know I wouldn't have an unending supply of golf balls. So, but it was a magic moment to wake it up and suddenly have a gift like that. That was home. Home was full of wonderful memories. Of course, I had another memory. I had my grandparents' memories to look back on as well. That was at the Croft at Dundenald near Montrose, and we were all there. We must have stayed overnight, although I do remember coming back late, maybe very late, 9 o'clock at night even, on an old-fashioned bus with wooden seats. They called them utility buses, and that was due to the war. There was no upholstery on bus seats. We had a wonderful time at my grandparents'. The big bedroom had been tidied up. Coal fire, log fire was burning away. The Christmas tree was in a corner with real flames, real lights on the Christmas tree. It was cosy. It had a magic about it. There was no bright electric lights. There was no even perhaps 1 or 2 paraffin lights possibly, but it was a gloomy, warm Christmas event. And of course we all had to say something after all the wonderful food that Granny supplied and offered us, including her delicious trifles, etc. We had to do a party piece, and there was a little bit of nervousness there, but of course sometimes we were encouraged in those days to have a party piece, whether it was a birthday party or even something at a school. We were encouraged to try and have a thing, and one of my things I had to do was to sing Down in the Glen. I think a lot of people might have thought the further away that glen is, the better. So, but we all had something to do, and that was magic. So there was the home magic, there was Granny and Grandad's magic, and some amazing things come to mind as well. I remember I used to set fishing lines at West Haven, lines across on a sandy part of the harbour at West Haven. I had them tied down by lumps of stone at each end, a long line with many hooks, and the idea was to set these with worms and be very careful to watch that the tide covered these worms so the seagulls wouldn't come and eat them up. But on one particular Christmas morning, I remember having calculated that the tide would be receding at the very point where I should be going down to look at my fishing lines, and lo and behold, I had a fish, and I thought, this is, I don't think I had the sense to think what a wonderful Christmas present it was, but it was one of my very early nice pieces of fish I'd caught, only to find that a gentleman, a man who was a regular fisherman who had a boat, as I walked home proudly carrying my one piece of cod, only to be challenged by this man that had I taken the cod off his fishing line. However, I think he believed me. But it's a strange thing to remember those Christmas mornings, waking up to all the magic of Christmas. In a strange way, I can't remember how old I was, but maybe 14 or 15. I remember going to my first dance. It wasn't a school dance, it was a dance, a Christmas Eve dance. It was in the church hall in Holyrood Street in Carnoustie, and it went late. It went on late. I'd never been up as late as this. Maybe it was going to be 11 o'clock, but it was a Christmas Eve, 11 o'clock. And being quite naive, I'd never been out so late. As the latest possibly I'd been was getting home from my Boy Scouts, probably. But I had this idea that Christmas Eve must be different because Christmas Day is going to be different. What happens at Christmas Eve? I'd never experienced this before. And I, in my naive way, walked home looking for some bright stars in the sky, looking for a different colour in the sky, looking for some magic in the sky. I don't think I was quite naive to think that there might be a sledge and, you know, Rudolph and gently floating across the sky. But I did have the idea that there may be a glow of something heralding a Christmas Day. Anyway, I discovered it. It didn't. So I think it's easy now to go back, and when you start to think of all the magic of Christmas, how all these little boyhood stories come back to one's mind. School, of course, offered different things approaching Christmas. Firstly, we knew that there would be a Christmas party in the school, and in my case in Carnoustie School, the domestic science room, a place where boys had never ventured, looked like it had been tidied up and tables had been put to the side. And there we had to practice our Christmas dances with girls. This was really a big adventure. We danced Scottish things like Gay Gordons and Strip the Willow and Ate Some Real. All these things we had to learn. And of course, it was a new world, dancing with girls. But of course, along come the day when the party was held. I have no recollection of what food we had to eat, but I do remember one of my friends had to step up and play a tune on a piano. I had to stand up and recite a poem. I think The Vagabond comes to mind. And we each had to do something. And then, of course, the dancing. So there was this excitement at school, the excitement at home, the excitement at Granny and Grandad's, all this. And as the years rolled on, of course, we became more expecting all of these wonderful, wonderful moments. As I grew older, of course, Christmas took on a slightly different dimension. I had a wonderful job as a paper boy, and of course tips at Christmas time was a marvellous thing. Real tips, 2 shillings sometimes, maybe even 2 and 6pence. It was marvellous. And later I also had a Metis boy round with William Loan Company, and I delivered groceries all over Carnoustie and even into country areas. Again, tips were marvellous. But there was also the practicality of Christmas coming along. I remember the shop was much busier, the boxes of groceries were greater and larger. Small things come to mind. Housewives booked, strange thing to think about this nowadays, but housewives booked cans or boxes, I should say, metal boxes of biscuits, because in those days I suppose a box of biscuits was a nice gift to give to someone, but not only the biscuits, there had to be a nice view or picture on the box. So I think these were displayed as early as possibly October. Housewives would have their eye on a particular box of biscuits they wanted to secure. And it's an interesting thing from a financial point of view. Housewives booked a box of biscuits, their name was attached to the box, and they were all stored up in the back shop waiting for Christmas week. I guess mums and dads had a budget and they had to wait for an extra pay packet perhaps at Christmas or New Year, and that would be coming along. But until that moment arrived, the box was securely left for them, waiting to pay for it approaching Christmas Day. These were practical things. Of course, the other thing was it depended largely on when Christmas Day fell, which day of the week Christmas Day was going to fall. That was quite important, and equally, even more important, when New Year's Day fell. But for example, if you imagine Christmas Day was going to fall on a Monday, we have to remember that Sunday was the only day that we had a day off in the retail grocery world. So Christmas Day on a Monday meant housewives were going to buy in advance 2 days of groceries. And of course, it might actually have been the case in later years where Christmas fell on Tuesday, and sometimes housewives had to think of shopping for the 2 days and then rushing for another 1 day for an extra day's purchases for Christmas. And New Year was even more difficult to contend with. Let's say New Year fell on a Monday or a Tuesday. There were extra days for housewives to plan their purchases. But so yes, Christmas had its practical elements where the pace of life built up. There was a great atmosphere in the town, a small place like Carnoustie. The post office was bulging. I can remember seeing posties with huge bags of letters, postcards, cards being posted. I can remember extra people. I think vaguely remember extra people were brought on, maybe students older than me, people I knew who were hired to deliver more bags of letters and Christmas cards at Christmas. So there's a big buzz. The shops were packed, extra displays. I remember a local butcher, he always had a wonderful, it was Black the Butcher, always had a wonderful display of Christmas and New Year festive, let's say festive foods. He had chickens and pheasants and hanging up on his display in the shop. Steak pies, of course, was another big element on display. But he also had something quite unique. He had a pig's head with an orange in its mouth. And I was intrigued by this. I remember once, this is another element of how shopping hours were organised. There were no fixed times when Christmas Day shopping ended. My boss, who quite rightly kept the shop open for as long as he possibly could. For instance, until perhaps he would look outside and look along the street, and if he gauged that there was only 1 or 2 people still approaching, he would keep the shop open in the hope of an extra sale. But there would come a moment when he would decide that's it. So it could have been not the normal 6 o'clock, but it could have been 6:30, it could have been 7 o'clock, may have even been 8 o'clock in the evening. He would keep the shop open until all of these, he thought the shopping had passed. So I was perhaps cycling home back to West Haven from the Willie Lowe's in Dundee Street. And I remember vividly, as I cycled past Black's butcher shop, glancing at the pig's head in the window. And we didn't have wonderful, glorious electric lights in those days in the town, but there must have been sufficient lighting somewhere. But as I cycled past, I swear to this day that the reflection of a light in the pig's eyes followed me as I cycled past. I can't remember. I think I maybe thought something silly like the butcher had planned it that way so that people could get a bit of a shock seeing the pig following them along the street. I don't think it was planned at all, but it was just my imagination. But so yes, shops were gloriously decorated. It was a big thing for every shop to try and compete and have the best looking display, whether it's groceries, butcheries or whatever. Mm. So the retail world, the grocery world in particular, but of course there was another small part of my life where I had a non-grocery world. I was 6 months as I left school thinking that being a TV mechanic engineer would have been quite the job of the future. I have to say, I think looking back, the job of a TV engineer lasted no more than 20 years, I think, because new technology came along, so the valves and the resistors all disappeared. But for 6 months, I worked in Ricky's in Arbroath. And lo and behold, of course, we didn't get Christmas Day off, whatever happened. So I've worked on Christmas Day in those days. That was quite a shock. It was just accepted. I don't know how Mum and Dad organised the Christmas meal on that day when I worked on Christmas Day. We must have fitted it all in, but we took it for granted. So my memories go back to finding my one fish at West Haven, gloriously feeling so happy about that, discovering all my gifts, boyhood gifts, the school, the world, my first dance late at night, seeing the sky glowing or not glowing, or expecting it to glow when it didn't. So glorious memories of growing up in a small town like Carnoustie. The pulse, the whole atmosphere just was exciting, and wonderful, wonderful memories.
Well, as someone who led such a successful career in commercial retail, you may be uniquely placed to answer this question, but do you feel that Christmas was a less commercial time back then? Was it more focused on community and family?
Very good question, Tom. I think with the advent of television advertising, as we know it today, the communication ability for organisations, be they retail as we know across the country, be they manufacturers or whatever, is the screens pulsate with all the offers that come along. As we know, sometimes it starts very early in the year. But if you scale it down and think about it, each of the shopkeepers in a place like Carnoustie, and I dare say many places of a similar size to Carnoustie, and cities, at the end of the analysis, when you think about it, everybody wanted to make their own mark at Christmas time. Of course, the potential market was the only thing that differed. The potential market for the grocery trade in Carnoustie, we would have, I've never counted them, but let's say we had, the 2 or 3 or 4, 500 regular customers who shopped with us every week. That was our market. Our market wasn't the UK with television focusing on national products and national offers here, there and everywhere. Our little market was still, nevertheless, proportionately a big moment for every shopkeeper. And so I think it reflected, Tom, the desire to make the profit, to make money. There's nobody nobody denied that. The question was just making the most of whatever one's market happened to be.
So, staying with the theme of commercial retail, if we fast forward to 1959, you became the youngest ever manager in the history of William Lowe at the Brantwood Avenue branch of William Lowe in Dundee, a much more heavily urbanised area. And you, of course, at the age of 19, just really starting out in that management role. How did Christmas differ in Dundee? What were the main changes, would you say, between Carnoustie and Dundee when it came to that festive retail period?
Good question, Tom. Firstly, of course, in a management capacity at the age of 19, I was nervous. I was a nervous person anyway. But I knew, and I'd been trained enough to know that your customers are the thing that you must be very, very careful with. I was lucky in the sense that Brantwood Avenue was positioned close to 3 elements of society as part of Dundee. Firstly, there was the local council houses nearby the Brantwood Avenue branch. There was a rather more difficult part of Dundee, which was difficult. It was impoverished, And there was across the road, there was a place called Johnson Avenue, which was bungalows and rather upmarket places. So I had three groups of customers. Each one of them had their own pluses in my world as a grocery manager. The housewives in the council houses were had reasonably good spending power. They had families to deal with, so they were obvious family orientated. The posh house across the road, they represented a different spending power, I think. But the impoverished part of the city was really difficult. And I treasured these people as much as all my customers. Some of them worked very late up on Christmas Eve. Some of them came in to the branch and had come straight from the jute mill, and their faces were covered in dust and their hair was covered in threads of jute. One lady actually had what I thought had an accident. She had what looked like blood streaming from her nose, and I inquired rather ignorantly, have you been in an accident? She says, no, son, it's the snuff. I said, and I suddenly realised that I'd encroached in an area that probably I shouldn't have encroached on, but the poor lady, obviously, and I suddenly realised, snuff, of course. If you're working in a dusty jute mill all day, you need to do something about it. So all these customers I treasured, and all of them had their own world to deal with at Christmas time, all of them in their own way, and I knew how difficult it was for some of them. But so Dundee for me represented, and I dare say Carnoustie may have had on a scale, much less scale than what happened in Dundee, but for me it was on my doorstep in Carnoustie. Looking back, I think we of course had licensed grocers. We had which I think tended to deal with the upmarket customers, licensed grocers, high-class grocers, they described themselves. They saw themselves as slightly different than the William Loan Company. The William Loan Company, I think, had a broad spread of customers, but there I was in Dundee. As I said earlier, the experience in Carnoustie was the same, keeping the shop open. I found myself wondering, when do I close the branch? Do I keep it open longer? I'm eager for every penny to be spent. So I had to make the same decisions. Nobody ever said you close at 6 or 7 or 8 o'clock. One made one's own decisions. And there I was. I remember, it's a silly little example. I tried to make as much as I could out of sales at Christmas time. And I used to buy in tomatoes from the local wholesale fruit and vegetable wholesaler. And tomatoes used to come in nice little wooden boxes. And I thought to myself, that's quite a good idea. I could make up a Christmas box and put in something suitable for people, for no matter what end of the spending spectrum that they could be. But I put in some Christmas orientated aspects like packets of biscuits and a packet of tea and some fundamentals that might suit some of the people who didn't have the big spending power. And I remember trying this out and made up 2 boxes and took them to my both grannies near Montrose. And that was my first experience as a manager, thinking to myself, in a rather marketing sense, I thought I'd found a way of making some extra sales. So I tried it out and put some 2 boxes together for each of my grannies, and delivered them as well. And so it was a strange thing, Tom. The way that the grocery trade was organised, it was such that you had your own customers beside you. You knew what your customers wanted. You tried to do everything to meet those customers' needs. And this little area I had in Dundee was also, I think, represented in Carnoustie, except that we had a different range of shops available for people in Carnoustie. whereas my branch tended to deal with all of these categories at the same time. But Christmas was pulsating, and of course, as a manager, I had the same problems as I mentioned earlier, staying open and meeting huge demands. It was hectic. There was no doubt about it. It was hectic. You went home late at night, and having been on one's feet all day on a Christmas Eve or a New Year's Eve, knowing that it would take a day or two to recover.
Well, moving into the 1960s, you had a variety of different roles in and around Dundee before eventually moving to London, where you worked for the Grocers Institute. What were the major differences, would you say, between a Scottish Christmas and a Christmas in, somewhere as heavily urbanised as London, particularly during the swinging 60s, that great period of cultural change?
Yes, I remember driving with my family back north for Christmas and New Year, I think. Tom, Christmas and New Year, I headed back to Scotland. The beauty of that was that in England, it was accepted. There was a definite different approach to Christmas in England. As I said earlier, I'd worked on Christmas Day in Scotland, but when I got to England, it was quite a different scenario. I think New Year wasn't quite seen in those days in the same way, but Christmas was the big event in England. I think New Year has changed because nowadays we see television films of rockets going off all over around the Thames or wherever, and so that has changed. But in those days, Christmas was definitely a time busy, but attitudes were different. The Scottish attitude towards Christmas was different, as I said. In fact, even Good Fridays were different. I remember rather in ignorance booking up some appointments to meet people on a Good Friday in England, only to be reminded by my head office that why you can't make any plans to meet people on Good Friday. That's a holiday. And in fact, my mind goes back to thinking it's not that long ago, maybe 30 years ago, maybe, when shops, multiple supermarkets in England started opening on Good Friday. So yes, there were different approaches to the religious elements.
So we get to the 1970s and you were working for Watson and Phillip, one of the great retail titans of Dundee. And you stayed with that job for over 30 years, so you must have seen many different changes in how the industrial landscape worked. But, of course, that also means you must have seen many Christmases when you were in the employ of Watson and Phillip. So
Yeah.
going from the 70s up until your retirement in the early part of the noughties, what kind of changes did you see in the way people celebrated Christmas?
Oh, that's a good one, Tom. I think my own family life probably had a bigger impact on me than anything else. With the children growing up, everything's focused on family, my own family. But we did enjoy better holidays, Christmas and New Year. There was no doubt about it. I think there was a different approach. I didn't feel the pulsating impact of the shopping elements going on in those days. There were deadlines set to do certain things by certain dates, at Christmas or New Year. But by and large, I didn't, if the word suffer is the correct word, I didn't suffer the pulsating panic and last minute buying in my own world. Although, from the point of view of the business, yes, we would, as a business, prepare special one-page supplements. We didn't do advertising on television, but we advertised grocery products and our cash and carry products. They were all advertised in newspapers and in appropriate places. There was a definite swing to all the Christmas orientated products, be it alcohol or chocolate biscuits or whatever. There were definitely aspects related to Christmas and New Year which dominated the marketing processes. I didn't get involved in those aspects directly, but there was a pulsating period building up to all of that, and of course, along came the office party in those days, and there's all sorts of tales that can be told about office parties. Some good and some not so good. Some rather never to be repeated stories of office parties. Office parties were a new thing for me. I'd never been in a situation, because I think I worked in my television days, my grocery management days, my William Lowe messes boy days. These were all aspects of life. But when you get to a collective office situation, the office party comes along, and that's a great moment for, let's say, good fun and a few extra beers and a few extra drams to be enjoyed, and to be very, very, very careful, because in the 1970s and 80s, laws were introduced about drink driving, etc., etc. That all became a matter that had to be considered. So there were golden moments for office parties. People enjoyed all of that. Good fun, but all had to be tempered eventually by how one conducted themselves and how they got home safely. Yes, it had changed quite dramatically, and when it came, I had a spell with Watson Phillip, which was all related to Dundee. What I would say, if I could draw a comparison between the Carnoustie situation and my Dundee 1970s, 80s situation, there was still the pulsating aspect was evident. In Carnoustie, it was evident with the housewives rushing to get shopping to cover a few days. Individually, that was what was going on in Carnoustie in those early days. But what I noticed in a place like Dundee, and I don't know if it's happening today, I don't experience these things now, but in the 1970s, 80s, there was a definite rush about the transport, about motor cars moving around Dundee faster. There was a pulsating element about the movements of things going on in the city. You could feel all of that. And of course, retailing would dominate Christmases anywhere, and in Dundee the same thing would happen. The department stores, large and small, all had their Christmas products to offer.
Well, Robbie, thank you so much for having taken the time today to share with us that wonderful festive nostalgia of half a century of Christmases in Scotland and indeed in London. It really has been a fantastic pleasure to have joined you on that journey of the holiday season, past and indeed present. So really, I would like to wish you and your family all the very best for a wonderful Christmas this year and for the future.
Thank you very much, Tom. As always, it's a pleasure to sit and chat about interesting things. And Christmas is certainly one of those that brings out so many memories of all the things that happen, of course, whether it's church life, school life, business life, and growing up as a teenager. It holds a magic for all of us, doesn't it? That's
absolutely.
And so I hope today there's still some magic for everybody in one way or the other. It's good to look back. It's good to look back. I think we were favoured in our earlier decades, but every generation will have its own fun and excitement. And I notice I sometimes go past a place. Can I mention names? I, I don't mean to advertise, but particularly when I'm selling books at Christmas time in a certain store called Dobbie's, there's a wonderful feeling, and that's the only place I can capture it nowadays. But the people coming in with the young ones and the kiddie winkies are going off to see Santa Claus in the grotto, and they're all excited. And Dad's got the Christmas tree wrapped up in some netting. People are still buying real trees. There still is a wonderful excitement about Christmas in 2024, the last one I saw, and I hope to see 2025. No doubt the same excitement will be going on, and it's wonderful to see youngsters so excited about Christmas. And so I think the magic's still there, Tom.
Well, wherever you are and however you're hoping to celebrate the festive season, we would like to wish you at home a wonderful Christmas and a wonderful, prosperous new year in 2026. So from everyone here at Extremis Publishing, wishing you all the best and looking forward to joining you again next year.